All right, I think we're live. If anyone in chat can hear me, just push one. All right, got a confirmation from the chat. Thank you for the confirmation. Welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 527, Black Geopolitics. Please hit the like button as you come in, share the video if possible, hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust, including those posted on the community tab. If you'd like to engage in this discussion, there'll be a link in the chat for you to click on. When you click on the link, make sure you raise your hand so that one of us can acknowledge you and advance you to the panel. This week is actually V-Day week, as the Allies won over the Axis in Europe. And what I wanted to do was go over a documentary about Black men's contribution to the war effort, and how the 761st Tank Battalion changed the game, as well as the Tuskegee Airmen, and as well as Black women's contribution to the war effort. Okay, let me pull up the video and then we'll get started. All right, let me get started. Share my screen real quick, and I don't know if they'll flag us for this, so I want to make sure that we're mindful of not putting ourselves in a situation where we lose our rights over this.
Silence too.
Hollywood is critical, and popular culture must understand our involvement in American society has been very intricate and complex over the years. And unless you get the scholars, the journalists, the Hollywood folk to promote this, not so much promote it, but at least mention it, it goes by like that, because who's going to pay a lot of attention to history?
If I look at the 20th century and I think of popular culture or scholarly works, and I'm looking for African-American participation in those, I'm either going to get a story that goes untold, or often is not, one that's severely distorted.
Nobody wanted to recognize the accomplishment. They were kind of written out of the history books for 50 years. The point of it was that nobody wanted to talk about Black heroism on a battlefield or Black courage.
In the history books and in Hollywood films, the role of African Americans in World War II has been a little more than a footnote.
After World War II, in American popular culture, I would challenge you to find a movie where you found an African American soldier as hero, all the way from the the early John Ford movies of World War II, right up to Saving Private Ryan, you won't find African Americans serving in World War II. They were written out, and when you cut out of popular culture the historic role of African Americans, you're really trying to deny people the truth.
Hollywood creates our understanding, our notions, our images of what war really is, even though it's a superficial kind of image. So when you see these movies of war and you don't see the presence of African American people and soldiers, it's very easy to conclude they didn't do anything. They weren't there. There is no way possible for you to talk about World War II and not look at the fact that almost 1 million men served in the US Army. So there's no way possible to overlook that unless you're just ignorant of it, you haven't done your research, or you don't care. It's not a part of the story that you want to tell.
The real story of African Americans in World War II took place in Europe, in the Pacific, and in training camps in the United States. They served in the segregated military. They died for a country that denied them the very freedoms they were fighting for. Their contribution would help defeat the German and Japanese war machines, and it would ignite the modern civil rights movement. It is time to tell the story as it really happened.
I never felt segregation and discrimination as keenly as I did until I went into the Army of the United States.
African Americans began to get their draft notices, and those that were called up, the War Department created a quota system here. They weren't calling that many in.
The United States Armed Forces during World War II was rife with racism. There's definitely separate and completely unequal forces. It was a segregated army, and it continued to be a segregated army and Navy. The Marines didn't even want African Americans in it.
You've got to remember that this country was very discriminatory, segregated, and there was no change. First of all, black sailors, as sailors per se, other than as mess attendants or stewards, weren't permitted into the Navy.
They thought of the Negro soldier as a thing apart. They did not treat him as an American who was in the Army, who would be asked to lay down his life for his country like any other American boy. They were stationed in the worst part of the post, close to the garbage dumps. They were not allowed to use the PX that was there for the use of everybody else on the post. They were not allowed to attend the White Theater. And sadly enough, their officers were not allowed to go to the officers' club.
We were set up in a segregated barracks, which became our school and our living quarters. And this was done despite the fact that at Great Lakes, they had the largest officer candidate training school in the country. But we were not allowed to go to that school.
Fort Devens was probably no better than any other American Army base in 1941, 42, 43. It was segregated. The post commander, of course, was white. There was a white officers club. All of the facilities in the post were white. Signs, no colored were allowed. We had Afro-American or Negro or Black MPs. They could not arrest white soldiers, even if caught in the act of violation of regulations or in violation of law. But white MPs certainly could and did arrest Black soldiers.
If you're looking at where the sources of contention and racism in the US Army, and you can take the whole military establishment, there were three main sources, starting with the officers' corps. A lot of those guys were Southerners, and they had no interest to see the success of Negro troops.
Officers more knowledgeable than myself
came around and commiserated with me, and I asked them why. And they said, that's going to be the first Negro tank battalion the American Army's ever had. Do you know anything about Negroes? And I said, no, only when I see them. They said, you don't know what you're in for. When we got our filler of officers, many of them kept saying derogatory things about blacks, how they would never make it.
And you had enlisted men, in which a good percent of the American Army came from the South. And of course, their experiences with African-American people was one of viewing them in an inferior secondary capacity.
So I was acquainted with a black officer that, in fact, we came out of OCS together. And he accosted two white soldiers, which walked past him without saluting, looked him in the eye and didn't salute. And he stopped them and made them salute. And they saluted and then went and told the sheriff. And the sheriff came and arrested the officer and took him downtown.
And the third was civilian, white civilians, because the overwhelming majority of camps were located in the South. And the huge problem was when those troops went on leave and went into town.
We were victims of being sent to locations where Negroes couldn't do any harm to cities they were stationed near.
I'd heard what happened to black people or colored people, as we're called it, south of the Mason-Dixie line, but I had no personal real experience. And my parents, who were Southerners, basically never talked about it.
It was this notion that comes out of civil society and how people perceive, believe, and felt what's the role for African-American people in American society, and was just transported into the military.
That's unbelievable to think that racism in the middle of war would be able to play that kind of role, but it did. And so you started having to, not only did an African-American soldier have to watch his back for the enemy, he had to watch his back for the ally too, which was Uncle Sam.
There are movies that talk about the famous Ledo Road that leads from the coast of India and goes up through China, the supply line, over 1,000 miles. 65% of the men who worked on that road were black engineers. You wouldn't know that. Hollywood's not going to say that.
The Ledo Road. Starting at Ledo in northern India, the plan was to drive through jungles, rivers, mountains, and Jap opposition to a juncture with the Burma Road. A supply route would then be forged from Calcutta to Ledo by rail, across the Ledo-Burma Road to Kunming, and thence to Chungking in China. The Ledo Road was begun by a handful of men facing a task that had been called impossible.
The handful of men is presumably white, as the film does not mention the more than 50,000 African-American engineers and construction crews primarily responsible for the road, as seen in a rarely shown Army film bulletin.
Freight trains of the Bengal-Assam Railroad pull into a transfer shed located near the point of origin of the Ledo Road. A detachment of Negro engineers began work on the road in December 1942. In this headquarters area, the Negro units handle every phase of the operations incident to moving vital replacements along the Ledo route. And when the first convoy from India to China rolled over the completed road, 25 months later, a Negro was driving the lead vehicle.
On the other side of the world, African-American troops battled frigid temperatures and blinding snow to build the Alcan Highway.
Well, black soldiers, some of them had never drove a bulldozer, had never drove a truck, a big heavy truck, never drove a road grader, but they learned how to use that and did that kind of work themselves. We wasn't taught to do none of that kind of work.
The terrain was very rough. It was unstable. It would vibrate, which made it rather difficult for the bulldozers. The temperatures varied anywhere from 32 below zero down to 65 below zero.
You were a black soldier. You had the absolute worst living conditions possible. If you were black, you would be in a lesser tent or a lesser quarter to live, that the white soldiers would be able to stay in a kind of more permanent sort of barrack or something that would help them to stay warm.
On the Alaskan highway, the black troops were housed in pyramidal cloth tents, while the white soldiers were in Nielsen huts and housed in some of the army bases. What protected the black soldiers inside of the tent, the frost was about an inch thick, which acted as insulation.
When D-Day is taking place, and there were up to maybe 6 combat units of African Americans involved in that particular engagement. And once the invasion of Europe takes place, that omission in Hollywood is very clear.
In The Longest Day, several black soldiers are visible for a few seconds in the background when the fighting is ended. There are no African Americans in Saving Private Ryan.
Quartermaster and other combat service support units were charged with going in on D-Day proper. So some of the first units to go ashore, some of those Arrowhead units went with the D-Day force proper. Some quartermaster soldiers came in with the airborne, the 82nd and 101st.
The all-African-American 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion manned the tethered balloons that were critical in keeping the German Luftwaffe from strafing the invasion force.
D-Day was the most emotional and dangerous day of my life. My job was a medic with the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. We went all the way around past battle wagons, battleships, everything is firing broadside on Normandy. And that's when our ship ran over a submerged mine. That incapacitated that motor at LCT. You have no method for moving. You're going in with the tide. That's what took us in, the tide. You can't visualize how many troops and how many ships and stuff went down on the way in. The number of casualties on Omaha Beach was phenomenal. We had never seen that many, or even thought that there would be that many casualties. I helped, along with other medics, to dress and to do the best we could with the wounded. The guy who was with me, who was a tank man, he was standing beside me. He said, "What is that over there?" I said, "Looks like a ship. Are they dead or are they alive?" They're dead. Oh my God, that's it. You could hear the shell mortar coming. Halfway down, the mortar landed on the other side of that truck, and the shrapnel and stuff from the mortar shell hit me in the left leg as well as the right leg. Being in a segregated army at that time, when we actually combined our resources with the white troops, there was no such thing as segregated. Because the people who are wounded, and if you're a medic, they don't care exactly who, what the color of the person was, or his skin or anything like that. Only thing they wanted was aid.
Surgeons, just even in the beginning of the Normandy campaign, found that they were using blood in transfusions about 3 or 4 times the rate expected. So the blood transfusion was an example of the kind of racial discrimination that went on at that time, because there was a policy not to give black blood to white troops. The Red Cross segregated the blood. The irony of this, of course, it was an African-American doctor, Drew, who did some of the pioneering work that allowed the preservation of blood so that it could be used for transfusion. One contingent of black nurses that was sent to the ETO were assigned to one of the station hospitals in England. But it was a station hospital that was assigned to caring for German POWs. General Hawley had the black nurses to use, and he really didn't want them to use for white American troops. So he used them for the Germans. The nurses had the feeling they had been singled out for a separate service and had no real possibility of transfer or advancement. And sadly, that was pretty much the case.
You know, the famous sign people would give is the V for victory. African Americans would do both the V for victory and a V for hopefully smashing Jim Crow laws, segregation. And the great hope of African Americans was taking part in World War II, showing patriotism, showing valor, showing love of the flag, putting their life on the line for the United States of America. And the hope was that after this experience, that they would be able to come back to a better America.
In England, in particular in France, one of the things that took place that was very interesting was that American troops would transport their racism to English society and to French society. What the Army would do, particularly officers, enlisted men would do, was to tell the town peoples, the people who ran the bars and the stores, not to service troops, and pointed out that they're inferior, they're animals.
They resented the fraternization between the Italian girls and Afro-American soldiers. Fights would ensue. Our soldiers had to travel in groups for protection.
A portion of the unit of the 29th Infantry Division, wasn't that many of them, they came in that night. And the first saying they said when they got in there, where in the hell did all these men come from?
Many in the English society refused to believe that and rejected it. In fact, there's a story in Newsweek of March 1944 where it points out, it tells a story of a pub owner kicks out white soldiers because they would come in and start fight.
They had to call the MPs and take the full 29th personnel out and said, these people can stay here, because the girl said, these people are gonna stay. They're not going anywhere. This is our friends.
Oh,
I just wanted to pause there for a second and bring in Nicole 11. What's going on, Nicole 11?
What's going on? What's going on, man? What's going on, fellas? What's going on? What's happening?
Gentlemen, have you you have family that serve, right?
Absolutely. Father,
yeah, okay.
my dad, all three of my uncles. They all went in. My father went in at a very young age. He was 14, getting ready to be 15, but he was a tall kid. So he lied about his age to go in because his brother Roscoe and his brother Lorenzo were already in. And he wanted to serve and said that it's time for him to go. So they all went in. And he went in 44 and 40, almost beginning of 45, and then the war kind of ended. But his brothers, one of his brothers was a teacher, so he taught black troops. And my uncle Buck, he saw a little bit of action, and it was kind of an interesting thing. And he did speak about some of the incidents that were there. But he did, but while he was stationed at the beginning of 40. Say that again?
No, go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, he he ultimately, then he was stationed in Germany. So by the time he really got in and circled over, because when he got in 44, he was training, he was stateside, and then they shipped him over after kind of like almost occupying forces. As we were cleaning up and finishing up in Germany, my father was there until 46, and I guess he had a very interesting experience there, and he thought that the Germans treated them very well, because I guess they had what they were looking for as far as certain types of goods and stuff they had. So he did, I guess there was racism. He didn't go into it heavily. He didn't speak about it deeply. But his older brother, Uncle Rasmus, Lorenzo Rasmus, he was the one who really saw, I think, a lot more, because he was a teacher. Then when he got drafted, he started teaching black troops and stuff like that, there just a lot of guys came into the Army, couldn't read. So he was helping people read and all this kind of stuff. So he saw, you know, a little bit more of kind of how these kind of white folks were. But their experiences, you know, they were very patriotic, and their experience was all about, you know, serve the Army and serve your country, God and country. They were all about that. They were all about that. And that's pretty much was the company line that they held literally, and I guess my father until he died. We didn't talk a whole lot about it. He gave some of his experiences. My uncles, when I would go to, you know, when I go to down North Carolina, they would talk a little bit about it, but they were very patriotic. They were very patriotic about the war. So they didn't talk about a lot of the extraordinary negativity that they did experience, because I don't think it was a proper, they didn't feel it was a proper thing to do then. I don't know what else to say. Yeah. But there was a lot of racism there. But anyway, go ahead.
No, I was just I found it interesting, that last statement that was made in the documentary about brothers going to Italy. I know a few brothers in the manosphere who served in the military have gone to Italy and have had similar experiences 70 years later.
Oh, it's as far as racism?
No, in terms of dealing with the indigenous people on the ground, the women on the ground. So.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, it was like that in Germany. I mean, I want to say it, but I have a half brother there. So,
let me finish this documentary. We'll give it another 10 to 12 minutes.
So there, I'm talking about, we learned, I'm talking about the peoples there were very different from the peoples here in the United States. They treated us better, I'm talking about, they welcomed us better.
The white wax had been serving overseas for almost 2 years by this time, but overseas commanders did not want black women to come over. So finally, with the pressure of all the Negro press and the civil rights organizations, they finally decided they would send one group overseas. We lived separately, we worked separately, and we operated as a separate battalion. Our outfit was completely black, and this was a great curiosity to many people. And one of the things I had to do at one point, we had so many visitors, I had to cut 1/4 of an inch off of a chair so it would slide down. And you know, when a colonel starts sliding down and can't sit up straight, he excuses himself.
By the end of 1944, nearly 480,000 African Americans were serving overseas. In Italy, the only African American pilots in the American Armed Forces were setting records. They were the Tuskegee Airmen of the 99th Pursuit Squadron and the 332nd Fighter Group, which were attached to the 33rd Fighter Group. Dubbed the Red Tails, the black pilots became the Army Air Corps' premier bomber escort squadron.
The 332nd never lost a bomber to an enemy fighter. 200 missions stretching from May of 44 to April of 45. That is a unique record. No white unit, and all the rest of them were white, that stayed in the hunt as long as they did to make that claim.
But the Tuskegee Airmen were made invisible to the men whose lives they were protecting and to American popular culture until the making of the movie, The Tuskegee Airmen, in 1996.
The commander of the 33rd Group was an avowed segregationist, and he did everything he could to keep the unit segregated. They were on a different part of the airfield. They weren't invited to join the officers' club on his part of the airfield. They were kept segregated in every way, shape, or form. Probably the worst thing that the commander did for them is that in their first combat missions, he didn't allow a veteran pilot to lead them into combat.
This rankled some of us because we felt here we were flying combat, fighting for our country, doing what we should be doing, and still we was being treated like pariahs by the rest of them.
One of the Army's best kept secrets was that there was a black fighter group. We had no idea that the Red Tails, who had given us the finest escort and whose escort we preferred, were black pilots. Not an idea in the world.
Being prepared to go overseas and risk our lives and being discriminated and segregated at the same time was a hard pill to swallow. And men suffered inwardly and outwardly from it. And it had a devastating effect on the morale of our soldiers at home, and an even more devastating effect on the morale of our soldiers when we finally went overseas.
In Italy, American troops suffered high casualties in difficult fighting. In films like Anzio, all of those soldiers are white. In reality, the all-black 92nd Infantry Division and the Japanese-American 442nd Infantry Regiment also were mired in the bloody Italian fighting against well-entrenched German forces. Their experience under the command of General Edward Alman and his white officers would stay with them for life.
When I got to the 92nd Division, to me, watching the officers of the 92nd Division and talking with them, it was the most shocking thing that I've ever encountered. And with regard to the whites, it's my view that there was a deliberate pattern of assigning the dregs of the officer corps to the black units.
I was angry. It made me feel very, very angry. The fact that my intelligence was insulted every time that I would make a suggestion on a tactic. The black officers were never given any latitude in any command situation at all. I was downgraded because I was black.
General Alman was one of the most prejudiced men, most prejudiced officers that I served under. He was extreme in his views and his lack of respect for subordinates. He had no respect for, especially for black men.
The 366th Infantry Regiment was the Army's only infantry unit with an all-black enlisted and officer corps.
Of the 132 officers, 128 of those officers had college degrees. Some had master's degrees, and a few had PhD degrees.
When the 366th was assigned to the 92nd Infantry Division in Italy, they came under the command of white officers for the first time.
And that was the worst news I think we could get, probably only exacerbated by the welcoming speech that General Alman gave to the 366th Infantry Regiment when it arrived. He seemed somewhat angry, and he said, as best I can recall, your Negro newspapers and your Negro politicians have been screaming for you to come over here and go into combat. I didn't ask for you to come, but I'm going to see that you get combat and your share of casualties. It was anything but a welcome address or a battle indoctrination address. There were men who even grumbled and talked about shooting him. And that's a cruel thought, but the circumstances were such that it just points out how far racism can go and how sad racism is. I think it's fair to say we were undertrained for combat soldiers. Colonel Queen asked for 30 days in which to give us intensive training in preparation for entry into the lines. But I think we got 5 days. We were primarily at that time sort of holding the line so that the Germans could not take troops from Italy into Germany or into France or any other place where they might need them.
The German soldiers in Italy were seasoned soldiers. They had come from another front. Namely, I think most of them came from southern France. They knew what they were doing. When you ran up against a bunch of them, you knew you were in a fight. On the 5th and 6th of April, my unit fought alongside the 442nd Battalion, which is an all-Japanese unit.
We had just been brought in and early April of 45 to join the 92nd in its last push to break the line.
Like Danny Inouye, for example, I didn't know that Danny was in the 442nd. You know, here we were serving on the same committee in the Senate. We were in the war practically right next to each other.
And let's face it, we were there because of our race. And the same thing with the African Americans. If we looked like the general populace, there'd be no fuss. But we look like Mongolians, and the African Americans look like Africans. And to fight under those circumstances, it's not the easiest.
The directions that came down from the 92nd Infantry Division and from the higher headquarters were so flawed and so inept that there was no way that success could have been achieved.
Our attacks were usually frontal attacks. When we had frontal attacks against entrenched locations of the enemy, obviously they're prepared, they know you're coming.
At that time, we were up in the mountains, and the 92nd was on the flatlands. It's easier to fight in the mountains than in the flatland, because in the mountains, there are a lot of trees and gullies and valleys, but out there, you're wide open. So the artillery observed from the other side can see every movement. So you're being shot like ducks in a pond.
And it has often been said, we were used as cannon fodder. To see them die unnecessarily, though we expected that we'd have casualties. We knew some had to die. We knew what war was, or we'd heard what war was. But it was so close to us. We were so close to each other. It was tough. It was very, very tough.
Well, we're surprised that they kept on fighting, because if we had to fight under the same circumstances, I think some of the enthusiasm or the morale, obviously, would be dampened.
The question as to whether they would have intentionally used us for cannon fodder. Certainly, looking on it in retrospect, one could come to that conclusion. I don't want to charge them with it. The results were the same.
What made me very close to the men of the 92nd Division came about on April 21st. That's when I was wounded several times. I was first shot through my stomach, but for some reason there are no pain nerves around there, so you know it's dripping blood, but you keep on going. And about a couple hours later, my arm got blown off, but that wasn't enough. I put a tourniquet and kept on going until they hit my leg. Then I couldn't move, so then I got evacuated. Obviously, I lost a lot of blood. There was a practice in that sector. I don't know if it was worldwide, but at that sector, whenever they gave you a transfusion, they showed you the bottle. And the bottle will have the name, the rank, serial number, and the unit. I was able to read about 10 of them. I was told I was given 17 transfusions, about 7 or 8 of them while I was unconscious. But of the 10, all 10 were from the 92nd. So in my veins are black blood. And I've said this many times, if it weren't for the men of the 92nd Division, I'd be dead. It's their blood that kept me going. And here I am, a senator.
Interesting. Let me bring in MOT. What's going on, MOT? What's going on, Onyx? Your mic's breaking up a lot, MOT.
Hey, can you hear me?
We can hear you now, bro.
Yeah, what's going on, man?
Chilling, man. Chilling. I don't know how much you've heard so far.
No, I mean, I've watched all these before, man. I watched all these.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. It's sometimes, man, you know, it's just tough watching, man.
Mhm.
Tough to watch, you know.
Onyx, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I was waiting for MOT to finish speaking.
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, I haven't seen this documentary in particular, but yeah, like MOT said, it is hard to watch, you know, being a prior service member and just like taking in the fact that, you know, the country treated our people like shit, treats our people like shit, and it's just like, you know, time and time and again when the country calls for men to come to service and women, you know, like it's we're in the front, we're doing stuff, and it's just hard that, you know, seeing that they just try to like brush that history underneath the rug.
Yeah.
The thing is, you know, you got guys like MO2 come from the South who've seen a lot more in and out of it. So
Yeah, definitely. My grandfather, he was in the Korean War. He was from the South, and I think that was Nagone earlier saying that his grandfather like joined the service when he was 15. My grandfather did the same thing for the Korean War. He just, I don't know how they was able to do that back then, but you know, I guess they looked old enough, and you know, he served in the Korean War. So
yeah.
Well, I can tell you how it was. That wasn't my grandfather. That was my dad, and how they kept age for many people. Because my father, see, none of them were born. See, they weren't born in hospitals and stuff back in those days. They were born at home, and you know, that's just kind of how things were during those times. So they kept the names, or what gave you your birth certificate was the name and the date that your name was written down in the family Bible. And that is what passed on for your age. So my father, you know, fudged the numbers on the book, and he fudged the numbers on the book, and that's how we got in.
that's interesting. I never knew that was like.
No, that you know, you're a younger generation, so you know, me and my generation, you know, we go back to the Second World War with our parents, and even beyond that, because our grandparents and so forth would have, you know, been involved in the First World War, and if you had any very long-lived ones, you would have people like my great grand aunt, called her Aunt Big Sister. She died in 1875, but she was in 1975. She was 105 years old, and you know, we'd have conversations about her going back and forth to Tallahassee, Florida, Sumter, South Carolina, in covered wagon. So these are people who I was talking with. So you're not going to see that. That generation is gone. But that was the end of what my generation kind of were dealing with. But my father was a World War II vet, so you know, we were. That was a big part of our family. You know, we understood that, but they didn't talk about a lot of negative stuff. They just didn't. Just like my Aunt Big Sister and them, they didn't talk about slavery per se. She was born 10 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. She didn't speak about slavery like that. So that's kind of how people were. I don't know, you know, I don't know why, but I'd have been telling those stories. But anyway,
we got that. Yeah, we got DE Raptor on the panel as well. Shalom, DE.
Shalom, Powell, and guys in the chat. How you guys doing?
All right.
Man, this thing, my heart here kind of beating really hard because I went, I was in Italy in 74. No, 74, 75 too. And the stories that I heard stories from people who've been in before me, older guys, and even Italians in the area where I went to in the north of Italy, up around what was then Yugoslavia. They were talking about black soldiers. But some of the things that I heard from those guys and the guys from Vietnam was like, man, how you guys put up with that? I'm serious. I got into a couple fights because of this foolishness, and I shouldn't have. But it got me here, just holding back the tears.
All right, let me finish the rest of this documentary, another 10 minutes or so.
What Hollywood's version of the war in the Pacific doesn't show are the thousands of African American soldiers and Marines who served in the Allied island hopping campaign. In the 1998 Academy Award nominated film, The Thin Red Line, which centers on units in the Pacific, there are no blacks. The all-black 24th Infantry Division fought with white troops in the jungles of Bougainville. Black Marine Depot companies served with white Marine combat units in some of the most desperate and heroic fighting of the war.
A depot company was more or less like a utility company. So a utility company could be used in any capacity, even in frontline combat, because when the Marines went on Tarawa, something like 1,000 people got killed in 3 days fighting. I think they lost approximately 4,000 on Iwo Jima. They lost thousands on Okinawa. When you're on that beachhead and they're dropping those mortars and artillery shells on you, that's about as much frontline combat as you can get in.
Black gunners on Navy ships shot enemy aircraft from the sky. African American Seabees built airstrips on Pacific Islands. And black soldiers drove the ducks that carried Marines into battle on Iwo Jima.
I came off there with my amphibious duck loaded with a 105 Hauser and 7 Marines. On the radio, but don't come in on Red Beach, it was too hot, come in on Green. The water was real rough because, you know, you gotta have training to know how to drive that duck on when the water is rough and your ramp is coming up and down. Well, I tell you, I was scared going in, I was scared coming back. All that fall over top and you don't know what's gonna hit you.
On shore, Black Marines faced the same nightmare of enemy fire that pounded white Marine combat troops.
I hit Iwo Jima with the 34th Marine Depot Company about D+3. This was the night of D+3. And they put me and a few other Black Marines up to hold that line. As it grew on and got darker, I realized that I was up on that line by myself. There being no light so you can see. All around me, I could hear Japanese talking.
The intensity of the fire on such a small area is that one could have been killed at any one time, at any one place.
Most pride, I think, is having put your life on your line for your country. The feeling then was that you would have lost your life for a good reason, a good purpose.
We continued and completed 183 days straight of combat duty, and the only reason why we didn't do more is because the Germans quit.
General Patton was a bigot, you know. In his memoirs, he never talks about the black soldiers.
In spite of his personal views, General George Patton knew he needed manpower to win the last great battles in the heart of Europe. He put the all-black 761st Tank Battalion on the battlefield.
And we went to a little town not too far from Nancy, and that's where we all assembled. And then we got visited by General Patton. And he told us that, you know, who he was, and he says, I have nothing but the best, and I sent for you. And he says, don't let me down and don't let your people down.
The Academy Award-winning film Patton uses part of the speech Patton gave to the 761st, who trained at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana.
30 years from now, when you're sitting around your fireside with your grandson on your knee, and he asks you, what did you do in the Great World War II? You won't have to say, well, I shoveled shit in Louisiana.
But the 761st is never mentioned or shown. The only African American to appear in a film that gave many Americans their picture of the Battle of the Bulge is Patton's valet. In reality, the men of the 761st, including future Medal of Honor winner Sergeant Reuben Rivers, performed heroic duty in one of the war's most horrific battles.
What used to surprise me, I wondered, why did we pass all of these tanks full over to the side, a division, and here come the 761st, beat up, tired, tank battalion to go in and lead the way.
The average life of a separate tank battalion in combat against the Germans was from 10 to 15 days.
And General Patton said, send them niggas back up there. When we had gone and stayed 15 days in our first battle, we went back and we stayed 183 days straight.
It was to be a record for the most unbroken days of engagement of any tank unit in the war. In the Battle of the Bulge, the 761st was critical in rescuing the 26th Infantry and 17th Airborne Divisions, who were being decimated by heavy German fire.
Well, the Battle of the Bulge was the worst, to me, one of the worst.
They said there was a slight bulge in the line, but it turned out to be the biggest battle they ever had.
We had to go 65 miles to Bastogne where the American was trapped.
I don't know just how many degrees below zero, but the wind was blowing terrible, and
it was dank and gray, and it was snowing.
It was about knee deep to start with, because it had been snowing for several days. They told us there were just a few Germans there, but there was a Panzer, which is a tank battalion, or more than that, a regiment probably.
We were truly nervous in Bastogne because behind every tree there was a dead soldier. Enemy or yours?
We was laying right, you just lay right beside each other, touching. He was there and I was on the left side, and he got shot right in the back. I don't know why they missed me. There were 235 in the morning in the company, and that night there were 65 all day. And then that night I said we retreated, but I was told we withdrew back to where we started that morning. We had tank support that time, the 761st Tank Battalion. You know, that was a good sight. They were sure welcome. They were real good. They fired into the woods and we got everything softened up. We just walked up there and they was all waiting for us. They fought side by side with the white people there. And that's the only thing that saved them probably at Bastogne.
See, we never worked with anyone but white infantry units. Maybe the first few hours, they felt that our services were not needed. But after having had a few minutes of experience with German gunnery and so forth, we were called, and once we were committed, they got to the place where they wouldn't even let our shadows hit the ground. They stayed so close to us.
There was a definite program afoot to suppress acts of bravery or acts of heroism on the part of the black soldiers. I never heard any stories or any comments concerning bravery by black soldiers from any of the white officers. Every time we turned around, we would hear about acts of bravery of the white soldiers.
Our most important battle, which the Army has considered to be important enough to be depicted in the Pentagon as one of the 10 major battles, was the Battle of the Lost Battalion, where we were called upon to rescue a battalion of the 36th Division, a Texas division. It took us about 5 days and we had 800 casualties. You know, it was a real bloody one. That battle was not made public until about the end of the war. The Stars and Stripes didn't cover that. They would cover all other battles.
In Aiken, the 761st fought 2 days for that town. We're in the 26th, I believe, Infantry Division. And the 4th Armored Division, they had us to pull over. The 4th Armored Division came through, and they said that the 4th Armored Division captured Aiken, and they got the credit for doing it. We didn't get any credit.
The first troops to liberate Dachau, you know, the concentration camp, were units of the Patton's Army, the 3rd Army. That unit was from my regiment. Because of the fast movement in that war in the last few days, this unit found itself ahead of the whole division, in front of the infantry. And suddenly they came across this concentration camp. They had no idea what it was, but then they realized soon that this was a prison camp. When the officers of Patton's army found out what had happened, they immediately put a clamp on it. Our men were told, you don't talk about it. So keep in mind that many of the men in my regiment volunteered from behind barbed wire. They were in these camps, these American concentration camps. And they volunteered while they were incarcerated. And so I think the officers must have felt the headlines would look terrible. Concentration camp liberated by men from concentration camps. So that became public about 10 years ago. Up until then, it was classified.
761st was assigned to the 71st Infantry Division at the time that this division liberated the camp near Wels, Austria. The name of the camp was Gunskirchenlager, and it was one of the smaller refugee camps or concentration camps.
Sergeant Floyd Dade of the 761st and concentration camp survivor Sally Ganor would meet again 50 years later. In the years since the war, neither man had talked to anyone about their first meeting.
Number one, nobody would believe you, and it's hard. Those are bad memories to talk about. My body would just shut down.
I still have to think back of him sitting there on top of the tank like a black god looking down on me.
Amazing.
What were we going to find? Were we going to find the same things that we had left behind us when we went to war? Was it going to be any better? Was it going to be any worse? Which was a possibility.
African Americans came home and in many ways were denounced for their service, particularly in the South. Why? Well, you know, the point of Jim Crow was to keep African Americans down. And if an African American came back in his military uniform back into Selma, Alabama, or you know, back to Biloxi, Mississippi, the whites that stayed home, in particular, wanted to beat the daylights out of them.
We came back with the 49th Infantry Division. We went straight down to Camp Stewart, Georgia. The first words we heard was, "Here comes that nigger group. Got all them medals over there in France. We're going to make sure that we're going to take care of them while they're down here."
So I was standing down on the corner of 14th and Independence Avenue, all dressed up in my blues. And I never got so many hate stares in my life from white servicemen who looked at me and said, "Who does he think he is?"
So immediately, from the moment they returned to America, they realized that things were not going to continue in any kind of sense of them being treated as patriots or being awarded medals of honor or being applauded nationally for their service.
I tell the story
popular stories where we came back from overseas and we came down the gangplank. We were hero fighter pilots. There was a white soldier saying, blacks over here, whites over here. And that was the ultimate. The white troops had the press beating them. All the black troops had was a couple of people from the black press. And we did not get the accolades that we should have gotten because of the prejudice.
The war is where race and democracy intersect. And really the seeds of the modern civil rights movement are planted in World War II. And this is the real significance of this war because African Americans clearly decided this is our country. You can't have black men fighting for democracy in Europe and they don't have it here. And what the war does is confront these notions, these ideas that's embedded in the Constitution about freedom and democracy. And what black veterans did was to put that up to the face of American society and say, look at yourself. You know, this is about freedom, democracy, and opportunity for our treatment. And we are American citizens too.
One of the really unwritten aspects of this century is that link between the African Americans who served in World War II, who went on to become leaders in the civil rights movement. Take the example of Medgar Evers. Medgar Evers was from Mississippi. Medgar Evers served with distinction in the Second World War, came back to Mississippi in uniform, said, I fought for democracy and Mississippi because he loved his home state. He came back and he couldn't vote in Mississippi. And the two are so linked, World War II and civil rights, that without the World War II experience of African Americans, serving their country and facing the humiliation they came back, I don't think Harry Truman would have moved to integrate the armed services as quickly as he did. And I don't think he would have had the leadership potential coming out of the movement of a Reverend Hosea Williams, of a Medgar Evers, and dozens of others who had the courage because they just saw their buddies killed. They just saw their best friend's head blown off. And now they did all that. They put their life on the line for this thing called democracy. And they came back to a country that didn't have democracy. So my God, they were going to get it.
I am proud to have been a Marine, and you'll find most black Marines think the same way that I do.
There's always something to pay for racism or bigotry or discrimination. No question about that. But I think the contributions of organizations like the 92nd Division were made known to the highest command. And I think the 92nd Division, for example, played a major role in Truman's decision to desegregate the military.
Someone commented recently at a convention, a white officer who was joining us at a P-51 convention. And he said he was always startled when he got around a bunch of the old veterans that we talked so much and we didn't talk about, there I was at 30,000 feet behind the guy. He said, you never talk about combat. He said, you always talk about what happened to you in Tuskegee, what happened to you at Freeman Field, about being banned from officers' clubs and flying combat and not being treated well. And I tried to explain to him that that was really our great combat.
I believe I'm an American, and I believe this is my land, and I've always felt patriotic about it. I still to this day, and I certainly did in the Army. But if you have that kind of patriotism, you have to have it in spite. If you are black, you have to have it in spite of the segregation, discrimination, and the injustices that you have to live with.
My sergeant major came in.
All right, man. I did learn a lot from that. I just wanted to actually let people watch who had not seen it before. Found a lot of interesting points in it. So,
well, I think one thing you can say, this country has shown over the years, over the centuries, straight up to the present day, they've never liked you much, regardless of the amount of blood that you spilled and all of that should be bequeathed to us based on that. They haven't liked you much, and I think it's always good for us to see this, to show the efforts and so forth that we've pushed forward here in this country that have been amazing. And you hear very little about it. You look at the media on television and everything else, like movies and all that. They made sure they cut that out. You still came back and you had people getting lynched. We've had 200 lynching bills come through the Congress over damn near since coming into the late 19th century, ship to present day, and none of them have been approved or ratified. I mean, so we dealt with Al-Qaeda terrorism, if you will, throughout our lives in this country, and you can see with this film we served valiantly everywhere, in stellar ways. That's why when since they haven't liked you much or whatever, you're crazy not to stand up, scream for your rights, let people know exactly how you feel, get out there and talk about your accomplishments and everything else like that, because no one else is gonna do that for you. And this kind of relates to that C.J. King situation and so forth, where hey man, I got my degree and and I'm the prize or whatever it is. Yeah, we should have he's the prize, and you should always have your eyes on the prize. There was a documentary some years ago that was pretty good about the civil rights movement. And this last commentator was correct about the civil rights movement really starting at, I mean, it started after the Civil War, of course, but certainly, it was on and cracking after the Second World War. President Truman, who integrated the forces and so forth, felt he had to do that. And he was an individual who basically said, he didn't call you a black man, he called you nigger. That's what he said. He called you nigger. They believe that he was actually duly initiated into the Ku Klux Klan as well. Certainly before he got in, he did not address black people as black folks. He addressed you as niggers. And I believe there was a comment where he said that a white man was made from dust thrown up in the air, a nigger was made from mud, and what was left came down as a Chinaman. So that was kind of his view on things, on how we saw people, and saw you as a nigger. But yet he still, after your great efforts you put forth in the Second World War, he had to integrate the forces. And here was a man whose lips would easily be dripping with interposition and nullification if he could. But since he was president, he couldn't do that, and he had to start to integrate the forces, and then they started to integrate society after that. Just want to drop a little bit of that on you, but this is what we've done. Your country's never really liked you. They don't like you though. Mm-hmm. So you have to understand that, and that's why you have a consistent uphill battle in this country, and we should never take anything for granted. And we should agitate at all times. And that's what Frederick Douglass said before he died. What do you do? Agitate. What do we do now, sir? Agitate. And that's part of our legacy. We have to talk, educate, and agitate. Consistently get people out there to make moves. And anybody who's asking you to stand down or be quiet or shut your mouth are not your friends. We are in a constant fight, a constant battle. You're still somewhat in the Civil War here. And it can be lost if you sit back and still lay back, because your enemy is a bloodthirsty, hateful, murderous savage, and they will not stop unless you stop them. And that's where we're at. And I just hope we understand that. I'm mincing no words here. I have no reason to mince them or shorten them. But this is our history. Look at the war and look at the savagery, and then also let's be proud as well. Okay, Mike, go ahead.
No, I was just going to swing the mic to anybody else that want to jump in. I just found that to be interesting. I wanted to get into the Russian aspect or the Soviet Union aspect as well, but if anybody else doesn't want to go, we can go into that as well. The Soviet Union's contribution. Oh, go ahead, D.E. Raptor.
Yeah, what I want to say is, like, if you ask, I mean, when I was in the service, I served with probably about 30% of the people I went into service with were African American. And many of those guys came from the South, and they knew some of this story. They didn't watch it. They were told about it because they had parents who got involved in it. Today, if you ask 100 black men, I don't know, say 40 years or younger, I would say probably 60% of them have never seen one of these videos. And I get upset at the education, not the system per se, but the people. My people who don't teach their children about this part of the history. Why you deserve to get what you're supposed to have is because of this. It's not don't go back to slavery and say, well, our foreparents were slaves, so, we are owed this. Go back to World War II, just 70 years ago. World War I, hey, my granddaddy gave his life for this. My daddy, like Lagon, my daddy, my uncles, my aunties, they sacrificed for me. And none of these people know what their granddaddies from Nagonda, but nobody knows what their father did. Nobody knows what their aunt did because they weren't taught this thing. But we here fighting against one another, and the same brothers, their grandchildren are now being harassed, not being taught, not being educated. We know that the Caucasian is not going to do it, but what about the family? They should know this crap, and they should know why we as a people have to succeed against it. Those guys succeeded against all odds. You see, this guy was talking about how they were building bridges. They just tell them, go in there and build this bridge. These guys couldn't read when they left home.
That's a good point.
Now you tell me why in the hell this generation and the generation before it can't get their butt up and start working on it. Parents got to teach them, man. Parents got to teach them or kick their butt. If they don't want to learn, you kick them in the butt, put them out of the house if necessary. You got to put them through the hardship to make them, force them to act.
Shortly after the Second World War, as we came home and we moved into society, which was still very segregated, we had still very segregated. You had the GI Bills, which put a lot of people in school and helped a lot of veterans buy homes. Your government, and we've said this many times here, your government, then after that, with the suburbs or the suburban areas were built up after the Second World War, and that period after, they called it baby boomer generation. Folks of my generation were born then. We were the babies that were being born during that period as America was back on its feet, prosperous, and certainly the number one world power. They segregated you in your neighborhoods, and they redlined you. So your GI Bill could not get you into certain neighborhoods where you were able to build wealth. And these were soldiers that came back who fought the same types of battles and the same wars, and faced the same savagery from the enemy that they had to face. And they came back home and they were segregated by their own government and redlined, which has affected us to this very day. So we may think that, oh, that was a long time ago, but it reverberates strong and hard right up to this very moment, right up to today. So let's not look at this as a broken chain. Let's look at this as a series of events. After that period, you were segregated and so forth, and they tried to, and then they came after your family, and that's much of what our manosphere speaks about the breakdown of the family, the single mama, generations that have further eroded, that strength. So when you talk about you need to get on these kids and get them educated, we don't have a lot of that familial infrastructure, and what's concomitant with that as well, as far as us really putting together an ethic, an ethos to really build this up in our family. It's a different game. When I grew up as a kid, we had a big kitchen, and we had the sit down kitchen table dinners with your mom, your dad, your family. We talked about a lot of things. You learned about a lot of stuff. That is gone. Our kids don't have that. Single mom and everything else like that. And you're supposed to compete equally. So you have to look at the warfare. What I'm trying to say is look at the attacks that have been steadily coming down on us since that period. I just want to just bring that into focus to say, the Second World War was a seminal moment in this country's history. It was a great moment for us to come back to this country and really help to build it. Greater civil rights, the whole game, everything that went on after that. And after that was the attack on your family. And here we are today. And we're still talking about that right here, right now, which is very relevant.
My point, going is that every one generation had to face their challenges. Like
yes.
the people coming out of slavery, they taught themselves and each other how to read.
Certainly.
And 5 years, 10 years out of slavery, they were congressmen writing books.
Unparalleled in history.
You see,
came out of slavery within 10, 15 years. But, we had a literacy rate that was almost on par with that of the white community. Not quite. Unparalleled.
Yeah.
A story untold.
Right. After World War I, we were building cities. You know what I'm saying? Oklahoma wasn't, that didn't appear out of nowhere. Those are people who educated themselves and built themselves up. So every one of us
had educated people who went there, and had educated people who went there to help to build. Exactly.
Right. So every generation has their challenge.
Yeah.
You can't just sit down and say somebody's got to do it for me, man. I'm sorry. I can't. I understand.
No.
I understand what you're saying. I know what you're saying. I've seen it too. But we gotta sit up.
I didn't want to say that we're making excuses. What I was saying was, every generation come in, you are consistently in a fight.
Exactly.
And we have to look at how this warfare has come down on us. Those towns that you're talking about, many of those successful towns that were built, and like we say, Tulsa, one of the wealthiest cities in the state of Oklahoma during that period, was attacked. There was an attack on it, of a physical attack, of literally of mongrel hordes, in savage hordes coming in there to destroy the place. Then you saw this go on in other areas. We had another series of attacks, and that's what I'm bringing up, the attacks on your family, and that's why we're here. That's why it makes sense for why you have a manosphere and these other kind of places. I don't want to put ourselves on the level of that, because that's big, but even in our small little ways, we want to sit here and consistently talk to our people and consistently continue, a fight, because you're being attacked at every level. And what we're seeing through the Second World War, ending there and coming out, are a series of attacks. And here you're going fighting for your country, and you've got these white folks in there, trying to treat you like an animal, but still you fought and you were brave. And people looked at that and said, man, these guys are something else. And you had your hateful crew out there, a hateful group that was trying to keep you from gaining any level of notice. And our media played a very big role in that. Our media played a very big hand in not even telling you about what you were involved in. People didn't know about this. And then we have this information, the stuff comes out, and you see that every generation comes up, we're under a certain level of attack. And certainly during the 60s, after that, and that World War II generation that came out of that war, were still attacked. They were still attacked at home, redlined and segregated. And then we had civil rights that fought all the way through that period, from 45 to 65. It was 20 years. A whole generation came up, and then the attack on the family from there, and the series of attacks of the drug trade, the drug wars, pushing drugs into your community, and so forth. These are attacks on your community, and what I'm saying for us is we have to recognize these things. You're at war. You're consistently at war. We are a community that has been sanctioned and is at war on a regular and consistent basis. And we have to understand these attacks, and we have to, counter them. And that's what it is. There's no excuse. Education is very important. Mike talks about this all day long. We got a fourth industrial revolution, and we're not in it. We're not in it the way we are. No. The fourth industrial. This is critical. We talk about this all the time. He's got dockets that we have dockets of just how many shows have we had talking about this. These are attacks on us. We have to respond. We have to respond, and that's also a big reason as to why we are here. I hope we don't lose sight of that. We get a little emotional at times. We lose our cool on occasion, but we're here for a reason. And the reason is not to find out how much pussy you can fuck, or how jawline you walk around and say that you are. That means nothing. That means nothing. You had the greatest men of our generations come out here, do their level best, and they still got shitted on by people who were structurally inferior to them. And it angers me that we sit back here and we have some of the things going on that we do. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't have it. You are under attack. You are at war. Let's think about that. Very, very, very key stuff Mike brought up today. Great videos, Mike. Great shit. Good shit.
Thanks. Let's go to Dr. Phoenix if he's available. I don't think he's available. We can just go into the Eastern Front. Stalin's Red Army pushing back the German military from Moscow all the way back to Berlin. One of the greatest comebacks probably in military history. Would you say, Nicole?
Yep.
I'm sorry, Mike. Repeat that one more time, Mike. I'm sorry. Please repeat that very quickly.
No, I was saying that Stalin's Red Army pushed back the German military from Moscow all the way back to Berlin. One of the greatest military comebacks in history. Would you agree?
Agree. It's not even I agree. It's a fact. After the stunning losses at the Battle of Stalingrad or Leningrad, and Hitler's forces literally 25 miles outside of Moscow, that froze in the Russian winter cold. 1 million troops they had that really ran up there. The Russians lost close to 4 million as we look at it, and God knows how many other people were killed as far as civilians. But then when they turned around and they went on their offensive, that offensive did not stop ultimately until the fall of Berlin. Mm-hmm. And it was the Russian forces that certainly bore the brunt of the Second World War, and they were the instrumental military force that stopped the Russians. I mean, excuse me, stop the Germans. Russian army did that. It wasn't the American army, contrary to popular belief.
Well, Steven Spielberg says otherwise, right? Increased his infamous
that bullshit Pearl Harbor that he created, and then that almost made it look like we won Pearl Harbor or something. I mean, it was fucking garbage. But this is what these guys push on you to get you to believe, a certain narrative or lies. What I suggest people look at also, if they have Netflix, is look at the untold history of the United States as told and narrated by Oliver Stone. And what he does is he's got a series of about 13 episodes each an hour. It's about 13 hours. It'll take you a couple of days to go through it, where he starts from World War II, and then he actually ends off at the end of at World War I, literally on his 13th chapter, and he goes into the untold history stuff. And he was kind of looked upon a little bit unpopular for that, because he told a lot of things that that the American media outlets didn't want to be told. He was a little bit short on some of the black stuff. That's what I gave him a little criticism about, especially our participation very much in the Second World War, of which this film covered very nicely. And there's a lot more there. Actually, you actually had aces, that they didn't want to talk about, who actually had 5 kills, or they said 4.5 kills, and all this kind of stuff. They didn't want to even tell you about the black aces that we had during the Second World War, during this period, of which was pretty bad. But we've had a few. Lee Archer being one of them. You guys take a look at him and look him up. And a few others, of which they ultimately gave them ace level accolades 40 years, 45 years later, which was just pretty crazy. But yeah, we had immense participation there. But a lot of what happened in the Second World War was told in a fantasy. A lot of stuff wasn't really true. And what Mike says, as far as the German army, which was the most powerful army on the face of the planet, before, as the war started off, it was the Russians who ultimately broke them and defeated them at the end. It wasn't really us, it was them. And that story has never really been told. So
yeah, and the thing is, Hitler sent his guys into Russia thinking that they were subhuman and that they would be easily defeated within a few days or a few weeks. I mean, and
yes, he did.
That turned out not to be true. What a big mistake that was. Probably his biggest mistake in the whole entire war was to go after the Soviet Union.
Well, he made a lot of absolutely ridiculous mistakes. Mm-hmm. Which he self-sabotaged himself at levels that are astounding. But yeah, fighting a 2-front war was very stupid. And then his Operation Barbarossa, going into Russia at the time that it was, and thinking that he was just going to knock these people out of the box, was ignorant. And he should have learned from the First World War, but he didn't seem to pick a lot of those, some of those lessons up. But he did do that, and he went into Russia, in my view, poorly prepared for what he was going to face. And one of the big things that the Russians had over the Germans were Russians had a lot more people. They had a lot more young people to throw at them. They had a lot more human resources to come at the German troops. And I know the Germans felt that they could just, rout them because they had more superior equipment and fighting tactics. But one thing you find after you fight for a while, you become better at it. You become more skilled at it. And you get a chance to have more encounters with your enemy, and you can see ways in which to defeat them. And if you're not able to knock them out overnight, of which rarely happens in war, they were not able to do that to the Russian forces. And so the Russians were able to consistently they were able to build fairly cheap tanks, that was small, but were very effective, were very fast, even though, if you hit them directly in the center of the body, you could blow them up, but yet they were quick, they were fast, and they could do tremendous amount of damage to the very heavy, though very good, but very heavy, slightly less maneuverable, German Panzer tanks that they had. So they could put a lot more of that out. They had a lot more people to come at them, and they kept coming at them. So as they started to wear down the German forces, the Germans didn't have the replacements of people to beat the Russians. And one thing people do is they fight very hard when you come onto their territory. And once you're on their territory and their lands, they're going to fight you very hard. And they're going to try to remove you out, get you out of there. That's what they faced. And then they went on their offensive, and it was over. And it was over. And it was over then. But the Russians had a tremendous army. They had a huge number of personnel that they could put out there. And the Germans, at the end of the day, did not have an answer for that, and they were beaten.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead, brother.
Yeah. Good evening to you, brothers.
Good evening.
I want to add something to what the brother D Raptor said earlier. I was kind of listening. Sorry about that. Just having a very interesting conversation, but nonetheless, he brings up a very good point. This idea where people don't know nothing. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, and I remember the stories he used to tell of him being in Germany and Italy and stuff like that, and just how he was treated, because he's originally from Jackson, Mississippi, and after he had gotten out of the military, he had worked for the Union Pacific Railroad till he retired. Passed away when I was a young kid. Passed away when I was a kid from prostate cancer, but nonetheless, the reason why these stories are important and why Black people need to know, especially Black men need to know these stories, is because you hear a lot of white males go around, especially your Bill O'Reilly's, his types, and they talk about how they were pulled up by their bootstraps and they come from these Levitt towns. People's not familiar. These Levitt towns, there's a number of these cities across the country, all of them named Levitt. And they're named Levitt for a very specific reason, because these towns were towns that were created by GIs after World War II. And these towns were funded by grants from the U.S. government.
The GI Bill, we went over there. GI Bill, baby. There it is.
Not
GI Bill.
VA home loans, but grants. Free money the government gave out to white men after the end of World War II to buy homes. They were giving away homes. The same was true in Beverly Hills. Beverly Hills were created by GIs. And the reason why these stories are important is because,
again, Dr. Phoenix, your mic is breaking up. Not sure what happened.
Can you guys hear me better now?
You know.
Yeah. And the reason I bring that up is because you hear these stories about, Black men, what are you fighting for? Have you fought for anything? What have you gotten for this? The very reason why Black men can sit up here and say they actually have some form of independence, why you can even talk about your independence, why your grandfathers can tell you stories about how they were GIs and they couldn't even go to the officers, club.
Had fights. Some of them had fights walking in there.
Yeah. I mean, this is, for someone like me who had a brother who wrote me a letter of recommendation, who was an Air Force pilot and a retired physician. And when I talked to him about why did he become a pilot when he was in medical school, he told me, one of my friends was a white boy, told me no niggas can never get wings, can never get pilot wings. And he said, You know what? I took 2 years off and I came back and threw my pilot wings down on his desk and said, what did you say again?
Yeah.
That's why that's important.
Yeah, and that's ignorance. That's the ignorance that you hear from these people, because they don't know either, but they think they know. Anyway.
And I say to say, even my father is also a veteran, and my uncle is a veteran, and me myself, I am a veteran as well. I was in Fallujah. I'm an Iraq veteran. I spent over 15 months in Iraq, and I was a very young man. I was barely 19 when I'm being put in charge of providing medical support to men twice my age. And the kind of responsibility that carries when you got men that look at you and expect you to save their life if something happens. And I think a lot of brothers don't understand that when you go through an experience like that, it's not just this life-changing experience, but it's really this growing up, this real growing up experience. And I think a lot of times the conversations in Black society, at least around these discussions, tend to become more about who can be the most pro-Black, or who can be the most hard charging. And again, we talk about what do Black men fight for, fighting for a country that never did some form. Hell, we have to fight our own people just to even get recognition for who we are as Black men. The conversation you guys had yesterday and the ones I've heard in the last 24 hours seem to be proof positive that the fight that Black men have right now is not just getting recognition from the country we fought for, also just getting recognition from our own damn people.
That's a very key point. That's why I was saying, when we talk about this manosphere, that we have to have it. We have to have these conversations, because we've seen the battles that we fight. We have fought horrific enemies. People consistently on attack on us on a regular and consistent basis. Outsiders coming at us all the time, and here we are. Like I said, like this CJ King brother. Stand up and let people know what's going on. You got those who are telling you not to, and stand down, and it's craziness. So we have to fight. We do have a big fight amongst ourselves, as far as really, like I said, getting our minds right. I say that, get your mind right. That's a very important thing. We got to get our mental game straight. And history and these types of things will help us. Because we've played a very big role here in this country. You wouldn't have this United States without us. And they've always tried to deny your history here and deny your place here. We wouldn't have a United States of America without us. We wouldn't. And if you understood the Civil War and you took a look at that and the role we played there, we wouldn't have had it without it. And then, we look at every major war that we've had. We've seen what we've done. Black men have, and this is not women, you have women who were certainly involved. So you can't, take them out of the picture. But much of this was on our backs. And, and we see Dr. Phoenix. I said, Dr. Phoenix, are you listening to this shit yesterday? Dr. Phoenix like, yeah, that's right. When I get my medical degree, I'm going to come out here and shake my nutsack too. Fuck it. I'm going to let everybody know what's going on. You're damn right. You're damn right you should be doing that. And we should be letting everybody know, screaming from the rooftops what we're doing. Nobody else is going to play that role for you. It's proven. So this is something that we have to consistently talk about and get our minds right and deal with our own people in our own community who have issues with this, because they're not coming from the right place.
Well, I want to just share this little story, this really quick story. When I was a young medic, within my first year having been in the military, I was tasked to do a pre-deployment physical for general at the installation I was stationed at. Little did I know the general was a Black man. And this was the first time in my life I've ever met a Black general. You read about him, you hear about Patton, you hear about John McCain's father, who was the commander of the Fifth Fleet the Pacific Fleet, excuse me. I think his father was the commander, his grandfather was the commander of the Fifth Fleet during World War II, if I remember correctly. And you hear these stories, all these great generals and stuff, but then you kind of hear these passing stories of Black men who were great military officers. And then when I was a 19-year-old kid, I met one, and I remember I was just nervous as hell because I had to draw his blood, do a physical for him. And I remember before I had to go in the meal, they were all coaching me, like, make sure you address him as general, make sure you say, make sure you be polite, you use proper etiquette. And it was, and I was doing this, and I remember he He just said, "Hey son, relax, it's okay. You can call me such and such." and it was the coolest thing ever, because I was a division level at the time. I was in division, and it was just one of those things like, man, and he kind of shared a little bit of his story with me. He had been in the Army, for over 20 some years, and he was the commander of the 18th Airborne Corps, and it was just like, wow, this was like, you never think that you can see Black men in these kinds of positions. And I say that to say, these things are really important, because I think so much of what Black men have done in this country is downplayed, not just by, quote, the mayonnaise brigade, for lack of a better term, but also gets downplayed by our very own people. And I think one of the hardest things I've had to deal with in my time is how I have to fight Black people, because Black people want to downplay my service as a veteran. They say, well, what did you fight for? And I ask Black folks all the time, well, what do you fight for out here in the hood?
Mm-hmm.
You find from street block to street block. You saying someone disrespect you on your turf. You don't own no turf. The white man can show you any day of the week. He can come through with some paddy wagons and throw every last one of you niggas in there, and it ain't shit you can do about it.
I haven't heard that term in a long time. Paddy wagon.
You know why, man? I grew up in Chicago, man, and Chicago police were infamous for coming through the low end. And when I say the low end, anybody that's from Chicago, I know D Raptors on the panel. You go in the Brownsville area, the Chicago police were infamous, man, especially during the summers, man. They would come through in the evening, paddy wagons, beating the brakes off of niggas, throwing them in the paddy wagons. You don't see niggas again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
Chicago police is infamous for having Black sites across the city. And I was born in the 80s, but I would say this much. In the 80s were an infamous time during Chicago, where you had John Burge was the former commander of the Chicago police, and we talk about the Innocence Project. A lot of those brothers that are getting off on the Innocence Project were the ones that were locked up under his command. And so when I mean, you got scores of brothers that are getting off 20, 30 years later, been sitting in Stateville, been sitting in all these prisons in Joliet and all other places in outside of the city now for decades, getting out for crimes they didn't commit, forced confessions, forced coercions. And so when you ask Black men, what are they fighting for? The question becomes, then what are we not fighting for?
You got to fight every day. You got to fight every day. Our history has been a fight, and I think that's all we've seen. Here you are in the Second World War. You're not only fighting the enemy, but you're fighting the internal enemy there. You're fighting. You're supposed to be your own patriots, your own patriots. You're fighting them. Black women talking about what on their nursing teams. Not able to, they're not able to treat folks properly. I mean, you're just looking at this, what's going on, throughout, on Black people throughout your history. It's been a fight, and you're constantly getting attacked, and we have to understand that. That's why you got to arm up, man. We got to start to arm up. Bothers me when we have people out here like DE Raptor was saying, and like Dr. Phoenix, not letting you know what you've done. People have no idea what you even achieved. No idea. And then you have other people sitting there, be quiet. Don't say anything about what you've done. That's what they've kept. That's what's kept you down. I mean, think about that. I mean, we have to, tell our own story. We're in charge of that, and we're under attack consistently. And we have to look at what that really means, and what are we going to do about that? Anyway, I think MOT, you looking to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, and like most times, it comes to the people who don't have a track record, telling you what have you done. It blows the mind, man. Like most things I've been through, they see it as, okay, what have you done? I'm not benefiting, so I don't understand how this benefits me. And unless it benefits somebody else who don't respect you, that's a very key point. then they consider you as made it. Otherwise, you're just beneath them. So that's why you have to stay away from some of these people. So.
I mean, you're absolutely right. And like I said, look at D.E. Raptor and look at Dr. Phoenix and so forth. These are men from two different generations. Must be 30, maybe close to 40 years between them. And they're telling the same fucking story. The same shit.
Yep. It keeps repeating itself. You gotta fight. Each generation has to fight. I mean,
same story.
We know we gotta fight, and we gotta tell each other. You gotta pass on to children. Look, children, you gotta fight. And here is how I fought. You know what I'm saying? We gotta do it.
It's why is there a manosphere? Oh, it's a co-ed manosphere. Why is there a manosphere? Because we have to have one. We have to have a place where brothers can sit down and spend this information. You know, a lot of this information that Mike is running down on this video, most people haven't seen it. Many people haven't seen this. Many people haven't seen it. Few people in the chat, and they're not looking. But if a lot of people in here were looking at this, they learn a lot more. Maybe some people.
I'm sorry, brother. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm just saying. Maybe some people don't want to hear about this, but this is why we do. Frank Capra, many years ago, did a series called "Why We Fight." I don't know. Some of you guys wouldn't know.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen it.
You've seen it. Maybe Mike and a few others might know about it. And what did Capra do? He just sat there and made these films. And he actually brought in the Black Troop piece. That's why I gave him a lot of credit about it. He talked about Black troops coming in to the Army. He spoke on that in that series, which was unpopular, but he put it in there. All right, that's why I bring him up. But his story was, in the media, was to sit there and talk about why we had to go to this war. Why do we have to do this? And who were the people who played a role in, and how do we achieve victory? And that story is consistently told. And now we talk about the greatest generation, and these people are venerated as superheroes of the old days. And much of us were cut out of that story. Many of us were cut out of that story. Movies and everything else like that they came. These fantasies that like Mike was talking about, that was brought up like the Steven Spielberg movie and Pearl Harbor and all that. All this fantasy shit brought up. You're not even mentioned anywhere in it, but yet you were playing a key role here, and we have to tell the story. We have to tell our story. Nobody else is going to tell it for you. I mean, go ahead, Dr. Phoenix. I'm sorry.
No, and that brings up a good point. And what I wanted to add on to what you were saying ago is that you think a series like Band of Brothers that Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks did, they show this, they repeat this series every Memorial Day.
They sure do.
At the end of this month, HBO will be showing this series for at least 24 hours.
They sure will.
Sure will. And again, the question becomes, where are these series about Black men, about what we did? It wasn't up until about 3 or 4 years ago Black folks even heard of Harlem Hellfighters. Because you know how they heard about it? Because Electronic Arts made them the cover of their Battlefield, I think it was 4. And they put the cover. They had the Harlem Hellfighters on the cover of their multi-billion-dollar video game franchise.
Who even knew about Red Tails?
Yeah,
I mean, I knew because my my ex-wife, her father was a Tuskegee Airman, but nobody knew. I knew about it because it was just a part of what my family and stuff were involved with, and so we knew this from firsthand experience. But how many people knew about this? People really knew. Story wasn't told. Not told in a way where like you hear about all these other great aces and and all this stuff that you hear about throughout history. Never heard about that. Never knew.
Black folks really need to go take another hard look at the movie Glory. Also take another look at the movie.
Nobody talked about it.
Go take another hard look at the movie Men of Honor with Cuba Gooding Jr. and Robert De Niro.
Yep.
The brother Carl Burchill.
Man.
Yeah. The brother Carl Brashear, he just died maybe about 3 years ago. And no one never knew about it. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. I mean, we talk about movies like Antoine Fisher, which are true stories, but the movies like Men of Honor, and there was a very famous scene in the film where there was an exchange, there was a verbal exchange between him and Chief Petty Officer that was played by Robert De Niro, and he asked him, "What did your father tell you that makes you want this so bad?" And he told me, he told him, "Be better than me." And then when he asked him, "Why did you want it?" Then he asked him again, "Why did you want it?" "Because they told me I couldn't have it." And how many black men never been told that before? You couldn't have something.
Well, you know,
you're not good enough to be that. That's why you fight.
That's I see that's a driving motivation in your life, isn't it?
But you know what's happening nowadays, Doc? Is that we are telling each other that now. Before the Caucasians told that. Now we are telling each other. You got parents telling the children that. You got brothers and sisters telling the other brothers and sisters that. I saw this ignorant video today about this mother daughter fighting over a man, and they're cussing one another out. That's the kind of thing that we got to deal with in this I don't know, this generation. Well, we got to deal with it all the time, but that's the kind of stuff that we got to deal with now. And you can't have that if you're going to build something, because you're going to have, like, right now you have this divide going on with half of us who want to move forward, and well, not even half. You got like 5-10% want to move forward, and the other 90% of them, 50 or 60% want to pull people down, and the other 30% are just there for the ride. So we can't be pulling ourselves down. We got other people doing a good job of it, and we can't join in and help them do it. That's foolish.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just to make a quick comment to the brother in the chat that said they always steal our stories. They don't steal our stories. A story cannot be stolen. You have to give it away. And how you give it away, you don't embrace it. You don't pass it down. Your children don't know about it. Your grandchildren, your great grandchildren don't know. Your story is never stolen. You decide to give it away.
Or
you let somebody else try to tell it for you, and we should be telling our own story.
And that's why I like the brother Spike Lee, what he did with the Miracle of Saint Anna. The movie
and
got,
he took heat for that,
bro. He took a
heat
lot
for
of
a lot of people came at him about that. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wait a minute,
And the movie was a true story, and he took a lot of heat for it.
Took heat.
Whenever those real stories come out, it's just like, oh yeah, black people weren't courageous enough to do that. You mentioned the Battlefield game. Yeah, when they released that cover, EA took a lot of heat. They was actually contemplating about removing the cover because
that's right. I remember reading about that.
It's crazy.
Right. That's right. Great point. Because that's exactly how that went down. It's exactly how that went down. That's true. They took bad heat for that. Oh boy, you just see this all day long. This is exactly how these guys roll. Great, that's exactly correct. But then later on, and also, what's his name, Lucas, when he did Red Tails, they wouldn't give him money for the movie. He had basically finance the damn thing himself. Wouldn't get financed. They wouldn't finance him.
I went to the
wouldn't finance the man for Red Tails.
I went to the National African American Museum in DC, and they have a section devoted solely to African American service members. And there was this one white guy who was looking at the medal. There's a whole section just of Medal of Honor recipients, and this white guy was just like looking at disbelief that there was that many African Americans who earned the Medal of Honor, in service. Either they were alive for it or they got it after they were killed in service for the country. And it's just like, I just find it like mind blowing that people find it that difficult that, a demographic of their country is actively, constantly, putting forth the best interests at the country. It's mind blowing to me.
And coincidentally, the museum was financed by none other than Mr. Smith, right?
Absolutely. That's correct.
Oh, really now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do brothers know? I'm just curious. People think brothers have not, it's been a long time since brothers have not gotten a Medal of Honor since like the Vietnam War. Do brothers know that? Do brothers are familiar? There are at least two brothers I can think of that have gotten the Medal of Honor in the Iraq War. One of them was one of the first ones to get it, was a first sergeant who died during the initial invasion into Iraq.
Yeah, they've been a few.
A lot of brothers. There's one Medal of Honor recipient that I have personally met. They got his in Iraq, who's still living. Because typically you only get the Medal of Honor posthumously.
Yeah, that's it.
Posthumously, excuse me. And so this particular, in the case of this brother that died, you can look him up, you can Google him, but his story doesn't get told, and and it was and how he died. I mean, it was the very definition of a man running into danger, and I think a lot of people don't understand that, like, oh well, you're not fighting for your people, or you're running into danger for the white man. This ain't about the damn white man at this point. Again, Black men have put themselves on the line, and I think this is what, shout out to the brother King Sigma for his discussion earlier. Black men have put themselves on the line in every arena, not just the military arena, and we reap the benefits the least from it.
And we've always been we've been segregated, sanctioned, like segregated, sanctioned, lynched, all kind of craziness. But we still roll through. That's why we shouldn't ever sit back and be quiet about who and what we are. And to our Black veterans, who we have a couple here right now, at least two on this panel. Oh, well, hold on a second. DE veteran, MOT a veteran, and Dr. Phoenix.
Onyx is a veteran as well.
Who?
Onyx. I'm a veteran as well, yeah.
Oh, Ernest, okay, I didn't see that. Okay, Ernest, I didn't see, yeah.
Onyx.
Onyx. I apologize.
That's all good, Nicole.
You guys are celebrated here today. You celebrated.
Hey.
So, you celebrated, and God bless you.
Let me say something real quick. During Vietnam, a lot of brothers found themselves with the choice. They would walk in front of the judge, and the judge would say, you can sign up for the military or you can go to jail. Today, you don't have that. They want you on the street. And on the street, you not only they want you on the street, but you got your parents and your buddies who want you to be in, fodder for gang wars that either going to end up dead or you're going to jail. When you come out of jail, you have no skill. So you're going to go back to jail. Come back out again with no skill. Mm-hmm. You die like that. Your children, you have 3, 4, 5 children. Who's supporting your children? You have no skill. They come out now with no skill. Follow you into jail. And a lot of the brothers that I met who had that choice, one guy went to the Pentagon and became Chief Master Sergeant. So that military changed their lives. And I know other people who, you guys probably know other people who had went through the same thing. And they changed their life.
Same for me. Same for me.
I wouldn't be sitting here right now telling you I'm a damn physician in training. I'm a damn medical student. If it wasn't for the time that I did spend in the military, I would not be able to sit here and tell you that right now.
Yes.
I would not be able to sit here and tell you I got all these degrees and I didn't pay for not a dime of it. without my military service.
The military can like I said, it has can have its downsides. You have people who have a lot of criticisms of it, from the corporate side and how they think, you're fighting for corporations and all that. But exit all that out of there, I can say the military, without question, has given many, many, many Black men a chance to build very productive lives, get a lot of good, not only good training, but good discipline underneath it, of which they've taken out from the military and applied into their civilian lives, and have done very well that way. So the military, for many of us, has been a path in many respects to the middle class, and moves up above. So that it has played that role. We can't play it down. We should be very proud of our African American brothers who were involved in the armed services of this country. It has made it a greater nation. We have added to the very fabric of this nation. Without us, this would not be the United States of America. Black men have fought in every major conflict that this country has ever had. So any white man calling you this is a white nation, you tell them, how could this be a totally white nation if every war we've ever fought in, Black men were an integral part of it? Please explain that one to me. And and that's the role we've played. We've bled. We've died. We've done it all. We've done it all.
Nagon, one of the things that I like to look at is history. And when I look at this history of the U.S., you see that the condition of Black people in the U.S. is the condition of America itself. When Black people were in slavery, when they were building everything and planting everything, the U.S. was going up. When we came out of World War I, World War II, when we were building, making cities and all that, America was growing. America now got us in a position of poverty. And guess what's happening to America?
Well, you know what they say, bro. You know what they say. When you look at, if we catch, if we're like the canary in the coal mines, So what happens to us, whatever you see happens to us, will soon happen to everyone else. And that's just how we are. We are the canary in the coal mine. And we can talk about it they threw drugs on us, heroin and all that very heavily in the 60s and 70s. And what do you see happen to these people here in the 90s and the 2000s? We see, look at the white man and all. I mean, you just look at everything that they've thrown at us, they've gotten. So that's just how it is. That's why I say a lot of them are very stupid, because they sit back here and they say, well, come down on these guys. What you're doing to us, in a lot of ways, will be done to you, and you'll do it to yourselves. And they don't seem to understand that, They don't seem to understand it. They enjoy this racism, but look at what's going on. You got COVID, got all this shit going on now. These guys are running up into state houses with guns. Or we ain't gonna treat us like niggas. Let me go, we'll shoot y'all up in here. I mean,
my God. Yeah,
you see that crazy?
What happened was they got caught up in the potential damage that's being done to us, and they forgot about they're going to use the same system against you too, at some point.
That's exactly.
Yeah, look at rural America. All the factories are gone. They're forced to drive hours to work, and then if they're not doing that, everybody's on public assistance. The Trump came through with this budget addition and cut all that stuff out. That's why them people are mad out there in the middle of nowhere with all them damn guns.
They're mad.
They thought they was going to be so saved, and it turns out he did a really big bailout for the corporations, and they got nothing. Nothing.
And now they're mad. And now they're mad sitting up there poor, sick, COVID down with guns. And now they're sitting there saying, these somebody's going to run over here and turn them on. They got a problem.
The consolation prize was Joe Biden told you can learn how to go code.
he can monetize what?
No, Joe Biden told the coal miners to, if you can mine, you can go learn how to code. It was an unbelievable statement. Said that in December.
It was. I mean, it was. He had some gall to say that. And you know, again, I think when you look at the contributions Black men have made, you know, a lot of, you know, we talk about the Buffalo Soldiers, for example, during the Civil War. A lot of folks don't even realize it was it was Black men coming into the ranks of the Union Army, which stopped the goddamn Confederates from completely overrunning the Union Army. The better trained soldiers were in the South.
Yeah.
People need to understand that. The South has a tradition of sending their sons to the military. They would send them to the Citadel in South Carolina. They would send them to West Point. They would send their sons to these military academies. That's how you get the Jefferson Davises and the Robert E. Lees.
Yep.
Well, you know, and they also went to Bobby Lee. You know, I don't call him Robert E. Lee. I have no reverence for him, so I call him Bobby Lee. He, you know, that guy that I got that from my great granddaddy. You know, that's just kind of how we look at these guys. Because I don't see these people as heroes. I find them as insurrectionists who should have been killed. You know, after the war, or you know, or taken out. They should have been neutralized. I mean, we never did that, and that created a lot of problems that we still have today. But anyway, you know, he went to West Point and all that. You know, these guys were well trained, but South just didn't have the you know, the amount of people and the war material to really fight the North. They didn't have it. You know, we fought. You know, Shelby Foote, a great Civil War writer who I read, and I read a few Bruce Catton and a lot of the guys, and these some white dudes, and they were very honest. They were like, the North fought that war with one arm tied behind its back, you know, because during that period also, you know, you had regatta races up Colgate, you know, on the Hudson with Colgate University and all these other schools that a lot of guys just weren't even going into the war. They were just hanging out. You know, they had money and they weren't involved, and you know, they could get some of the poorer Joes to fight. And you know, you had regatta races, you know, which are boat races and all this kind of stuff on the Hudson and all that. They had all this going on during the war as well, where the North just wasn't really even, you know, wasn't fighting this war like it needed to. You had incompetent generals like these other fools running around, you know, who just sucked. But had the South really started to really make a strong move, we would have just pulled out that other arm and just wiped them out. But in order for them not to have to pull that other arm out, who did they use to fight for us? It was us.
Yeah.
It was us at over 200,000.
Yeah.
Okay. Some say it was as high as 250 with some of the other aggregates that came up and fought in that conflict, of which we had some Haitians who actually came up and fought in that battle as well.
Yeah, the South had the
little bits of
cotton and all of that, but then all the money that they made from cotton was going to northern banks, so the banks controlled the money.
Well, yeah. I mean, Mississippi during that period, you know, during the Civil War was the wealthiest state in the Union. Really, it was very wealthy. It had a lot of slaves.
Yeah, Mississippi, man. They never covered.
Yeah, and then when we came down and tore their ass out the frame, they still haven't recovered. So not fully, you know, not fully. That's for damn sure. So that was the deal. I mean, the Civil War defined us. It was a war that defined us. But we don't have any more Civil War veterans alive today. I think the last Civil War veteran died, I think the year my brother was born, in 1959. So that's how close that connection was. Civil War, last Civil War soldier died when my brother was born. That's what we're talking.
In the chat, I agree with the brother that said this will always be a white nation, and white armed men can go into the Capitol and nothing happened. and black men can't do that. The problem is why.
Why would you want to?
Yeah, but I think the better question is why, because again, this comes back to the fact what we've seen happen in the last 24 hours. And the question is, some of the biggest protagonists against the brothers' Instagram posts were black men. And
they were.
I know black men hate this word, but I'm gonna say it. Yeah, there are a lot of jealous ass niggas out there. Yeah, there are. There are a lot of Negroes who look at black men that have gotten to certain levels in life, have obtained certain personal accomplishments, and yeah, a lot of black men see themselves and say, "I could never do that."
It's that. I totally agree. It's definitely a haterade, but also what deeply runs in the heart of many of these black men who walk around and talk like they're tough guys. At the end of the day, it's fear.
And you can never
fear. There's fear. Fear motivates a lot of what these people are, because a lot of these so-called tough guys who will come out of jail and everything else like that, they got their pecker in the white man's pocket. And they know this white man can come down there, drop a case on them, do whatever they want, sit on top of them at any moment they feel, and they're owned by them. They're owned by the system.
But
So
a lot of black
you know, and so there's a lot of fear. So I was gonna say, so since they have a lot of fear and all that, they're like, why are you stepping up? You think you're gonna do this? But they know they can't step up, but yet what are they gonna do? Well, don't bring a lot of heat down on me, but I'm gonna come down on you, you know, and you have this kind of shit going. And these guys are not your heroes, these ain't your fighters.
The other thing is,
these guys are afraid. In fact, Mike and also we call them, a lot of these guys who are doing all this shit, these are your true house niggas. I'm calling them out. These are your house niggas, man. These ain't your field niggas. These are your house niggas.
But the other thing is that they set the bar now is set at how much full-time you can get, not how much money you can make or how much education you can get, what you can create. You know what I'm saying? That gonna benefit not only you but your community or the world is the full-time. That's the level. That's the like MOT always put.
we say the Putin. The Putin.
Well, you know that comes from my generation, Vietnam. You know.
Yeah, that I was laughing. Yeah,
I think there was a famous movie called Pootie Tang or something like that.
That's a classic.
Yeah, they can't get past it. I mean, because it's a non-meritocracy. It's you know, it's you know, and guys who are stepping out, coming out, who put in mad work and sat back and put all the hours in that they need to do to pass to, not only through law school, but pass the bar and do all to become an attorney. There's a lot of work involved, many thousands of hours. So you have to put a lot of ridiculous time in, and
I think this goes to something that MOT always talks about. And what I was kind of getting at with what I was saying before was that, to the brother's point in the chat, I agree with that. But the why is, how can you possibly build a coalition or fight to even be able to do something like that? What white men can do, have true freedom in this country, if you can't even get brothers on board with just at least respecting each other and the accomplishments of other brothers, instead of just, you got to hate on this brother. Oh, he's not being humble enough. Oh, I mean, the last 24 hours have been an exercise in why I completely agree with what MOT does. Why he does it, because it truly is. It's the reason why. When you look at what your raison d'etre is, I mean, this is a problem that permeates throughout Black society, and specifically throughout Black male society. That at least white men and other groups of men, they can hate each other guts, but they can get galvanized behind something they believe in. You know what they believe in? Making sure every last one of you niggas stay at the bottom.
That's the only thing that keeps them from being niggas. Now they're already niggas, but
and you know what? They got a stronger why than Black men have.
and their game is they can constantly roll up against you. But this has been a part of America's history. You know, I call it the Medusa head. You know, if anybody's read the book White Trash, you will see where these people actually come from.
Yeah.
And how they've come to see you and you're a competitive class, and their job is a buffer class. And that's what kind of the how would I say, the ultra wealthy, the rich, and the plutocracy use them as a buffer against they're a buffer class that's to be used against you, so you can't literally rise up and come to get them, or even link up with this buffer class to get together with them to help to put more pressure on the plutocracy. They've got this thing set out, so they have a buffer class of people who are really, trained and designed to hate you, and to go to war against you, and to kill you if they can. And this is what they've done, Middle America, throughout the early 20th century and so forth, was one of the most violent areas around. They were lynchings and killings and murders over crazy shit. Black people came through there, try to work and whatever, and they were keep in your class, and they were getting hung and just murdered. I mean, just a lot of crazy shit. Oklahoma wasn't the Deep South. Oklahoma wasn't the Deep South. How did that happen there? One of your successful towns destroyed. That wasn't the deep South. That wasn't in Mississippi or Arkansas or Alabama. Not to say these things didn't happen there, but this happened out in Oklahoma. Moving towards Midwest. Damn near going across the country. Moving across country. How did that happen there? What was that all about? So you have to look at the history of who these people are, and the true deep-seated evil that this country has set up to keep you in a certain place, and the animals and the savages that they've set upon you. These are inferior people. These are not superior folks who came after you. There's a lot more of them, but these are inferior. Stringy-headed dogs that are animals, and they came after you. And this is what they've done. They walk around here still thinking they're better than you. It's as fucked up as they are. They still think they are, and they'll kill you. And that's one thing they'll do. They'll run into the state house and do whatever. They will kill you if they get the opportunity, and then they want to. And you have to understand. You have to understand what you're dealing with out here. Got to understand. I'm not saying
cultural programming.
It is, and this has been going on a very long time. People want to talk about People want to talk about presidents like, hey man, Trump, he's a racist and all that. Racist? You've had presidents Warren G. Harding, who had black blood in him, was a Klansman. You had people like Woodrow Wilson, who literally, when he got in office, he literally started to segregate the federal offices. So people had to work in separate places where it wasn't like that before. But then he came in there and tried to segregate the federal workers.
He would never call a black man black. He always used the word nigger.
They all did that. I mean, you had many presidents that were like this. Warren G, a Klansman. They said, well, you got a little bit of black blood in you. We know about this. But, are you going to be out here trying to help black people? Nope. Well, that means you got to take an oath of the Klan. And he did that shit there in the White House. Woodrow Wilson, looked at the film Birth of a Nation and said, yeah, this is absolutely true, man. This is exactly what it's all about. And you have some Negroes that I see walking around talking about that's one of their favorite films as well. And I look at some of these black people and say, boy, do you really know what you're talking about up in here? It's horrifying. We have Negroes out here who actually think this way and feel justified totally in doing that, which, it's beyond me. And like I said, Truman, who was a Klansman, never used the term black man. He didn't call you a black man or a Negro. He called you a nigger. I mean, and these were guys in the White who were presidents. Presidents. These are not just Joes dipping around. These are guys running your country. Felt this way about you. This is what we're dealing with, man. So a guy like Trump, that's when people say he's a racist. Oh boy, you haven't seen some of the guys we've had up in this esteemed office, how they really felt about you. So
yeah, he's a walk in the park compared to what came before him.
So, my God, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, people who were duly sworn Klansmen, presidents of your country.
Robert McNamara, Secretary of State.
You've had these people in there, people in your United States, in your Senate and your Congress. Robert Byrd, a Democrat, and he tried to denounce it in the end, but he was a Klansman. Tried to denounce it, and many others.
John Irvin.
John Irvin, I don't know, but I don't know if he was so much a Klansman. Even though you had many who were who certainly had their leanings. Many did, but I mean, I'm talking about people who you had who were ultimately draped in the sheets.
We got Jay on the panel. What's going on, Jay?
What's going on, guys?
Chilling, man. Put some volume on your mic, please.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, thanks for posting that documentary. It's very interesting. And it gets even worse when you consider the million Africans that died in World War II that nobody talks about.
Yeah.
The first shots of World War I were fired in West Africa.
Well, it was Ethiopia.
Yep.
It was Ethiopia, but by the Italian campaigns.
Yep. There's a similar documentary on YouTube about the West India Regiment that served in World War I, and also West India troops that served during World War II. It's atrocious how they were treated. Like, they fought with distinction in Palestine, and then they have to clean the latrines of German troops. Like, it's nuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
The insults are legion. I mean the insults are unbelievable.
Yeah, I heard.
They need to be told.
Yeah, I heard this morning. The Australians were pretty tight about not being mentioned in the war as well. How they fought on two fronts. They fought in the Pacific Theater as well as in up in Africa. So they were kind of tight. So they've been written out of that part of history as well. But that's the game that's being played here. It's the game that's being played here. A lot of Black people don't know that Caribbeans played a significant role in World War II as well. Because the British was making it seem like, the British fought this war. In reality, it was the protectorate states that came to the defense of the British when the British were losing.
Jamaica, Barbados, these areas.
Yep, they even had the audacity to ask for donations in their colonies, like war drives.
Denzel Washington did a movie. I think it was back in the late '80s or maybe early '90s. He was a British soldier, and I can't remember which island he was from, but it was an interesting movie because it essentially they brought in all these Caribbean immigrants into Britain to help them, fight during World War II and ultimately rebuild the country. And then they were sending on their citizenship, and then we're kicking them out.
Yeah, the Windrush generation.
Yeah, Windrush, yeah.
So my grandfather actually came in on that generation in 1951 to England.
Yeah, so did mine.
Yeah, their stories are incredible, like the stuff they had to deal with.
Yeah. I still have family over there too. So.
Yeah, I mean, crazy stuff. But I mean, this is what we've done in the Western world. Literally held it together, and you have people. That's what made me so mad when I sat there and I had that Jared Taylor coming up. I'll keep my cool, but here's a pure savage sitting next to me telling me this is all white country. I looked at this man and said, you didn't. You just didn't tell me that, did you?
Mm-hmm.
And then I proceeded to tear his ass out the frame. But yet, he felt comfortable coming into the manosphere and making such a wild boast. Unbelievable. wants to disrespect that he didn't like me in the end, and he decided he had to leave because he thought he got disrespected, and he did. But don't come in here. Don't come in here talking that bullshit. Knowing what we know, no, we're proud brothers here. We come from good families. We have good educations. We know that we know the history. We know what's going on in the past. Don't come here talking that craziness. But this is the stuff you had, and it has hurt them as it's hurt many of us. They don't know, or many will lie, but many don't know, and we don't know, and so stories get around that shouldn't, and we got to fill in a lot of those gaps. We have to consistently fight. We have to consistently fight. Frank Capra film, Why We Fight. There's a reason why we're out here fighting, and he did a series of films about this, and we should be doing kind of the same thing. Why we fight? We have to. Why we fight? Because we don't have the luxury of not being able to. We're under siege on a regular and consistent basis. History is very important. We must know what has happened in the past, because that's going to give us a lot of guidance for how we're going to move in the future.
MOT, did you have something you want to say?
No, that's it, man. I'm good.
All right, we can close out, man. Shalom, everyone.